Hello, friends, and welcome to another Meditations and Transformations. And I hope that your 2025 has gotten off to a fantastic start. But if that's not the case, and it's off to a good start, but maybe not fantastic, or maybe it's off to what you would deem to be a bad start or a rough start, regardless, I want to encourage you in 2025 to find yourself in community, like the rest of the cosmos. We as a species are meant to be in community, not only with one another, but with life itself. And it's in loving, hopeful, empathetic, reconciled, transformative community that we find our peace and our healing and that hope and that transformation that I spoke of already. So community 2025 is where you need to be, whatever that might mean for you. So certainly I'm here. I need you, you need me, we all need one another desperately, not only in 2025, but beyond. And that leads me to my next point, which is going to lead me to my bigger point of this video. And that is something that I said repeatedly, but I hope that you'll take just a second to really listen to what I'm about to say, to stop, to take a deep breath, and to listen. I recently heard someone say that they went to a Futures and Foresight conference. As a matter of fact, it was the Dubai Futures and Foresight conference this past year. And they said there was more attention at that conference this year on the soft skills of, basically being in community. What does it mean for us to be activists in futures? What does it mean for us to think about the future of all humanity? As opposed to the conference only being about, but obviously it was still there, about what technologies have been built, how do organizations make more money, and et cetera, which they consider to be the hard skills, right? And so they said, I appreciated, this particular person said, I appreciated there being more of an emphasis sort of on what they called the art side of foresight. But after going to a few of those sessions, I felt that it got a little mushy. And I was looking for the crunch of the technology and the governmental aspects and the policies and all those things. Can I just, again, stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and I want you to hear this. I'm certainly not alone in saying that philosophy, I know that's a word, if you're listening and today you're running a strategy team, you're the head of insights, you're in an organization, you're watching this video and you're in a company and you're thinking, how do I apply what Frank is saying to the work that I do? We all have a philosophy of how things should run, what reality is supposed to look like, which is going to be a point that I'm going to make in just a moment. How we should act in our daily lives, the actions we take come from the mindset that we have. If that's true, and of course you know that it is, then our mindset, our heart set, where our soul is centered, whatever that might mean, but that deep being, the being and becoming of who we are, individually and collectively, is so important because it determines the actions that should be taken, the things that we should do. But in our systems today that are linear, mechanical, quantified, we are driven to take action very quickly. Efficiency, productivity at all costs. This idea that we can continue to just try to be productive and make progress in a world with resources that don't allow for unfettered and continual progress. It's just not possible. So at some point, an immovable force meets an incredible fast object. I forget how that actually goes. Something has to give. The northbound and the southbound Lorax. Something's going to have to give. It's a Dr. Seuss reference. So it's so important that you understand today, whether you are into philosophy or whether you're like, philosophy, I'm turning the video off. I don't want to hear it. I've got work to do. I hope you didn't. Because your philosophy about how we should act, how we should move forward, determines whether or not we get it right. And I hope that you're not watching this video today and thinking that our mindsets, our heart sets, and our soul sets are mushy, and that doing stuff without thinking about why I'm doing it is crunchy. I would say it's actually the other way around. And as a matter of fact, it's definitely the other way around. Our philosophy, our mindsets, our soul sets, and our heart sets are the crunchy part, the meaty part. And then what follows because of where our minds, our hearts, and our souls are individually and collectively. That's why systems change is not possible. Let me say that again. Systems change is not possible. So stop trying to change our systems. I know that after me making this video, nobody's going to stop trying to change systems, but I hope that my voice is added to many more that have gone before me that are probably 1,000 times smarter than I am, that are saying, stop trying to change systems. That's not the way that we move forward as a species that needs to embrace the brethren, the kin of the rest of the cosmos, and understand our interconnected and interwoven relationship to the rest of life itself. Your philosophy is so important. So the reason I said that is that could be the video. It could stand on its own. But let me try to get in the rest of this in under 10 minutes, see what I can do. What I really wanted to address here on this video, besides the philosophy piece, is this something that's been driving me for the last 5 years plus, but also has come up again in the last 5 days, which is what I'm making the video for, because I've seen several articles, serendipitously ran across several books, people writing blog posts that are all saying a very similar thing. And that is that, as the video's title says, the future is dead. What do I mean by that? Well, really this idea of the future. And you can read writings from, and if I'm not mistaken, I'll probably tag him in this video. I can't really remember, but I think Thomas Klafka wrote a piece recently about the future being dead. If I tag him, maybe he'll get on here and say, I certainly did. Here's the piece I wrote. But you can find this in other places as well. Dougald Hine recently wrote a book, At Work in the Ruins, where he's basically saying the future is dead. Dr. Marcus Bussey has said on several different occasions in so many words, the future is dead. Because the idea of the future is one in which we are progressing forward in our capitalist, consumerist, colonial, and settler system. We have this view, you often hear it, it's like, where's my jetpack? Where's my flying car? Those come from what philosopher Federico Campagna would call technic. And he wrote this book that I think is one of the most important books in the last 5 years, called Technic versus Magic. And he says technic is this linear, mechanistic, quantitative idea that we focus on technology and that is what's going to save the world. And it's driving us to the brink. It has been for a long time, but now it's very clear that it has. It's built on monetization, capital, this capitalism idea, and it's driving us to the brink. It has been for a long time. But then he says magic is built on the awe and the wonder, much like I was telling you a few minutes ago, the heart, the soul, the mind, the understanding that there are different realities than the one that we are now living in. Our reality that we're now in was not inevitable by any stretch, and it's still not inevitable. Of course, the famous sci-fi author Ursula K. Le Guin said, and I will paraphrase, that capitalism seems like the system that just can't go away, and it has us captive, and there's no way to get rid of it, but so did the divine rights of kings, and that changed as well. So it makes me want to really address, I see that I'm not going to get under 10 minutes now, let's try to keep it under 15 here, and still relatively short. There was an article written by one of the futurists in recent times that has really driven the field forward, an amazing futurist, Dr. Richard Slaughter. And he wrote an article, I believe several years ago, called Farewell to Alternative Futures. And in the article, his statement is that it used to be that we thought the future was going to progress. But very similar as Dougald Hine said in his book, In the Ruins, Dr. Slaughter makes a similar kind of statement, but this one came from Dougald Hine. He says that when a world is coming to an end when its future doesn't have much left, when its story has run its course. And so we know this world that we're in, the one that I've already described to you, that said, the future, this is the future that the whole world's going to have. There's going to be this global grand future of this utopic buildings and spires of metal and glass and flying cars and the Technic. But as Federico says, that Technic can't drive us forward. So Dougald Hine says the same thing. We see that world coming to an end. And so does Dr. Slaughter. But what I want to do really quickly is I saw somebody bring up this article from Richard Slaughter again recently. And I would just like to say that the article is, I think, very good, but it would benefit from a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4. Listen, when you're writing an article for a journal or a magazine or anything, you've only got so many words. There's only so much you can say. And so the article on its own is very good, but I can't help but read it and come away from it thinking it would benefit from some more firepower, from a little bit more oomph, from a little bit more diving deep into each part of what he's trying to say here. Because he says that that grand narrative, the future, and the idea of alternative futures, saying, oh, we can think of alternative futures, and if we all just band together, we'll be able to go forward and we'll be able to fulfill those futures. Yet there are 4 things in particular that say, no, that's over. Farewell to alternative futures, at least in Richard Slaughter's view. And he says those 4 things are our global system change and the Anthropocene. So this is number 1. So let me just make the comment on each one of these really quickly. Every time now that I see this word Anthropocene, I flinch a little bit and I get like the hair on my back, because there's none on my head, stands up a little bit, because I don't believe that we actually are the Anthropocene. Let me clarify. We certainly are at a time when the human species has had an oversized influence on the environment, on equity, on our species, on other species as well. And yet, the reality is when we say that we're an entire era that is defined by the influence of the human species, we place ourselves back at the center as a separated part of the rest of nature. So it's very easy for us to say, well, we're in an Anthropocene, but all that really does is it reinforces, listen to this, it reinforces what Jonathan Rowson calls a crisis mindset. It tells us this is the crisis we're in. Let us try to solve the crisis from inside the box we're in. You've heard me say many times before that Albert Einstein was attributed to him as saying that we cannot solve the problems that we have today with the same level of consciousness that created them. You can't solve the problem of a system inside of that system with the answers from the system, coming from the system, and the solutions. So yes, we're definitely dealing with climate change. It's probably the number one thing that we're dealing with right now as a species. But as we know, that is exacerbated by all of these other interconnected and interwoven our confluence of crisis that is often known as the polycrisis. Jonathan Rowson says polycrisis is the wrong way to think about this. We need to be thinking about this as a meta-crisis, because our crisis is not one of things, but of minds, hearts, and souls. If we fix minds, hearts, and souls, the systems will change. We can't change systems, but we can change hearts, minds, and souls. And so Jonathan very wonderfully and expertly says we need to move from an idea of polycrisis, which is a technic, as a Campagna would say, to a meta-crisis, and then to uncrisis, which is Campagna's magic, which is really understanding that once we have broken free and we're dealing with hearts, souls, and minds, we're then dealing with not in a crisis mindset. There's still crisis, but we're not dealing with it inside of a crisis mindset, which will never solve it, will never get us anywhere. And that's why this is very important, because if, as Richard Slaughter says, the number one thing is like, look, there are no alternative futures anymore because we're dealing with crisis, we're inside the Anthropocene, then we're already doing exactly what Rowson and Benita Roy and Nora Bateson and so many others, Sophie Strand, so many others have said in the interviews that we've done with all of these wonderful people, is that we're staying in a crisis mindset. And according to Dr. Slaughter, we would be, the farewell to alternative futures. We have no ability to think of them because we're in crisis. Crisis is a bottleneck. But Rowson says, but that's not how we deal with it. Einstein says, but that's not how we deal with it. So we have to be very careful about that. So I believe that what Richard Slaughter said is true here, but I think that it would benefit from an exposition on this, really dealing with things like what Rowson and Jeremy Jepson and others would say about freeing ourselves from a crisis mindset, because we can't even think about different realities this way. Now, here's where I just want to interlude for just a moment and say, that if you think about it that way, we're not really dealing in the futures and foresight realm with futures. I don't know that I really care about futures. What? Okay, let me clarify that. What I care about is different realities. As I've said to you a million times before, all living things transform. If something is not transforming or doesn't transform continually or doesn't transform over time in periods of transformation, then it's dead. So transformation is a fundamental in our universe, in the cosmos. So that means that it's not really about alternative futures anyway. Farewell to alternative futures? Oh well, because it's really about alternative realities that we need to be thinking about. And that's why it's so dangerous for us to be in foresight and say, all I really care about is trends. What is the latest trend that is fed to me by the systems themselves? So when you think about we can't solve our problems inside the system, then why are we trending inside the system? Why are we trend hunting inside the system? And you could easily say back to me, because this is the system we're in, but I just told you. We stay in that system and we consider the system to somehow be heaven sent, that we're going to stay there. But if we understand what Rowson's saying, then we break out of this and then we understand something else is trying to emerge. Different things are trying to emerge. So I'll go through the rest of these very quickly. Dr. Slaughter also says that one of the things that is saying, causing us to say farewell to alternative futures thinking is this act of denialism and unreality that people are saying, who are in control in governments and corporations are saying, oh, I don't really know if climate change is here, and I don't really know how much inequality we have, and let's just keep pressing towards progress. I want to stop and say that one of the things that wasn't said in this article, and I think there would be a benefit if there was an exposition here, because I do believe this, of course, again, denialism and unreality is true. But I don't really think that anybody denies this. As a matter of fact, there was a recent video circulating on the internet, one of the pieces that led me to make this video here today, of David Graeber, the anthropologist who passed away in 2020, but wrote with Wingrove, The Dawn of Everything. Where he was saying that back during the Bush administration, a group of CEOs, largely from energy companies, came to Bush and the government and spoke to the president and said in a written letter, stop us from killing, stop us or we'll kill again. You have to pass laws to stop us because we will not stop ourselves. We don't necessarily want to kill the environment, but we will. If you don't stop us, we will. And nobody stopped them. So that's really not the denialism, because we're not in denial. We know what we're doing. But the unreality part makes a lot more sense, which basically says hey, we're just not, we're going to ignore reality. But what did I just say to you a moment ago? And here's where this would help a little bit. Is that when we think about what wants to emerge, we're really thinking about co-creating transformational realities. So this system that we're living in is not reality. Now, granted, the crisis are reality, but living in a crisis mindset is not reality. So we have to be very careful with this. We're living in an unreality space because trying to deal with the crisis that we have through the systems that we have in the systems that we have, that is unreality, and we need new realities. So again, if there was a little bit more exposition here, I think it would help somewhat. This repressed aspects of humanity is also important because Dr. Slaughter is talking about the fact that we always say, here's the steps we took to become a greater species and a greater species. We never recount all the terrible things that we did to get to where we are today. We never say, here's the mistakes we made, the big mistakes we made. We just sort of sweep those under the rug. But one of the things that might be missing here in this article a little bit, and again, you can only say so many things in an article. This is more of a critique. It's not I'm critiquing, I'm not saying this is wrong. and I'm adding to. A little bit more than a yes and though, is the idea that, and as Graeber and Wingrove had even stated in The Dawn of Everything, that, and Rian Eisler talks about partnerism, cooperation, different forms of government, family life, culture, society have already existed before. Now, granted, as Bayo Akumulafe would say, we can't go to back to the past. We can only go forward. There's been movement. There's new family structures. There's migration. New realities are happening. You can't go backwards. But we can go forwards in the idea and the understanding that new realities can exist. And we've already seen it before in history. It will have to look different going forward because there's more humans and there's different things and there's cities formed different ways. But we have to break into new realities if we're going to see cooperation and love, governance, and different ways of looking at reality that aren't beholden to organizations and business and corporations the way that they exist today. And then last but not least, the qualitative change in future studies, which I couldn't agree with more. This idea that we're approaching future studies from a much different place. And you can see this in the work that we even do. There's many others, of course, but the work that we even do with holoptic foresight dynamics, which goes back to the beginning of this video, which was 20 minutes ago, so it's time for me to stop, where I said that philosophy is so important. When we understand that we can live in a cooperative evolutionary trait of perceiving what wants to emerge, emerging novelty, that fosters, that generates, that supercharges our co-creative ability to step into transformative realities. That's holoptic foresight dynamics. That's the many-eyed hole of the dragonfly. Then you understand that we're operating from a much more qualitative changes in feature studies. And as Campagna said in Technique versus Magic, as Dougald Hine says in Work in the Ruins, as Jonathan Rowson said in Prefixing the Future and Prefixing our mindsets, and in other articles like the inner dimension of the future, as Nora Bateson said in her book that recently came out, and on and on and on and on. We are not going to see transformation. As Le Guin says, we won't see the end of kings ruling as we saw that end by a quantitative push forward through a hegemonic, colonial, supremacist, extractive, exploitative, hyper-consumptive answer. It won't happen. And I hope that you got a lot out of this video. And maybe I'll address this again since there's so much to say in my next video, my next meditations. I really want us to talk about learning, unlearning, and relearning, because it sounds great and everybody wants to say, yeah, that's me. I want to learn, unlearn, and relearn until it's time for you to do it. Then it gets hairy. So let's talk about that next time so that we can unlearn, relearn, unlearn, and relearn better together. Stay in community. Take care. Bye-bye.